The Tampa Bay Times this summer has run one of those like big multi-part investigative series, the kind that are designed to be entered into the journalism contests. Someone's hoping for a Pulitzer. Someone's hoping for a Investigative Editors and Reporters Award. And this big investigative series has been about stand your ground laws and why they are bad and why they need to be repealed and why the NRA is bad because the NRA has pushed these stand your ground laws. Now look, I'll be honest with you. I doubt that the Tampa Bay Times went into this with an open mind. Well, let's investigate these stand your grounds and see what we find. Because what they found is a hell of a story from an investigative reporter standpoint. It's a story, by the way, that we talk about on this program all the time. And it's a real story. In fact, it is the real story, but they ignored it. They ignored it because they had their narrative to push. They had their ideology to push. And that ideology was that stand your ground is bad. So they looked at 119 cases where the stand your ground case or stand your ground law had been invoked. And they said, well, this protects criminals. They said of the 119 individuals that have claimed stand your ground, 327 arrests among these 119 individuals. These aren't law-abiding citizens who are claiming stand your ground protection. These are bad guys. This is a law that's protecting bad guys. That was their assertion. Here's the thing. When you actually break down the numbers, you find that actually of the 119 people who have claimed stand your ground, some of them have actually been convicted. Some of them are still awaiting trial. There were 64 cases out of the 119 that the Tampa Bay Times talks about, 64, where stand your ground was actually successfully used as a defense. And in those 64 cases, you actually only find 25 people who had a prior arrest. So not even half of those who successfully claimed stand your ground had a criminal history of an arrest, much less a conviction. Break it down even further. And remember what we've been talking about on this program. If you want to reduce violent crime in this country, what do? You don't target the law-abiding gun owners, the 90 million of them. You don't target the 300 million privately owned firearms. You target the small number of violent career criminals in every city. And most of the time, we know who they are because we're constantly arresting them and putting them back out onto the street. The FBI has estimated that perhaps as much as 80% of crime in some U.S. cities is caused by 20% of the gang members in that city. Not 20% of the general population, 20% of the gang members. So keep in mind that fact as we break down these 119 individuals with 327 arrests among them. Because what you actually find are 13 individuals out of these 25 cases where someone had a prior arrest. 13 of those 25 cases, an individual had recently been in custody but had been put back out onto the streets. In the Tampa Bay Times article, prosecutors blame stand your ground. We can't go after these guys because we've got stand your ground. That's, pardon my language, crap. They have had plenty of opportunities to go after these guys, and they haven't done it. Is there something flawed about Florida's assault law that prohibits you from moving forward after someone's been arrested for assault? Here's some of what I'm talking about. A guy named Jorge Savadra. A month before the incident in which he claimed stand your ground, he was charged as a juvenile with resisting an officer with violence. Case was dropped. Alexander Lopez Lima, 2 months before his stand your ground incident. He was arrested for attempted strong-arm robbery, which was a felony. Case was dropped. Let's see. Tony Hayward, 4 months before his stand your ground incident. Charged with felony burglary and larceny. Charges were dropped. Andre Tyler, 1 month before his stand your ground incident. Arrested for marijuana possession. Record doesn't show any disposition. He also had a juvenile arrest record, including burglary, twice, larceny, carrying a concealed weapon, trespassing, and resisting arrest. Time and again. Maurice Moore, 5 months before his stand your ground incident, arrested on a felony charge of carrying a concealed weapon. Charged with no pros, which means they held it open, but they didn't do anything with it. A month before that, he was charged with aggravated assault with a weapon. No action was taken. Now, again, the Tampa Bay Times wants this to be about how awful stand your ground is, but what they found was the real problem here. And they ignored it. The problem is that we have a small number of criminals in every community who are committing a disproportionate amount of violent crime and wreaking untold misery on the residents of these neighborhoods that are plagued by these criminals. And we know what to do to make life better in those neighborhoods. We know what works. And it's not repealing stand your ground. And it's not passing a bill to ban magazines over 10 rounds. Or introducing a measure that will go nowhere to ban millions of commonly owned firearms. What we do is we go after the guys who are committing these violent crimes. We take them off the streets. We actually prosecute them. We don't offer them plea bargains. Instead, we do the opposite. We get them on every charge we can. You get the community behind these actions. It's been done before. It's been done in Hartford, Connecticut. They just did this, 40% reduction in quote-unquote gun homicides. They didn't do it with the new gun control law. They did it by focusing on the bad guys. They said they estimated in Hartford, they had 100 to 200 people. And if they focused on those 100 to 200 really bad actors, they were going to see a disproportionate result. They did, and they did. The Tampa Bay Times has found this evidence, and they've ignored it because they want to advance this narrative, this agenda that somehow we need to repeal a law or we need to pass another law, but for goodness sakes, can't you see it's the law-abiding gun owners who are the problem? Now, again, I'm used to seeing this from opinionators. I expect this from pundits. This wasn't just on the editorial page. This was a multi-part investigative journalism series that I think was predicated on the false premise that stand your ground must be awful for the state of Florida. And let's find the reasons and the ways to prove it to our readers. And because they were so obsessed with getting that message out there, again, they missed the bigger story. That you have, and by the way, it's not just Florida. You have across the country guys who are literally getting away with murder. Guys who are getting away with violent felonies. They're being arrested, and then nothing happens. And where do they go? They go right back out into the community. And what do? They go right on committing these same kinds of acts that got them arrested. And the cycle continues. You want to interrupt that cycle? You want to make those communities safer? Then go after the people who are wrecking those communities. You've already arrested them. You've already arrested them. You just have to follow through. So again, we've seen this, and we will continue to see this type of reporting. And when it is this bad, we'll call them out on it. The Tampa Bay Times pushing an agenda and ignoring a really big story.